rush to play this one. Get it? Howdy folks, I'm Joe, this is Same Name Different Game, and on this episode, thanks to Patreon request, we are looking at one of the all-time classic games on the NES. We are also looking at one of the worst, not ports exactly, but interpretations of a game of all time. So thanks, Frank. Anyways, let's get right to it with a little history. Mega Man needs no introduction. I've already done episodes on the first and fifth games in the original series with plenty of explanation about Mega Man's origins and history as Capcom's first property developed directly for the home market. Infamously, Mega Man didn't do all that well at first, but Akira Kitamura, Keiji Inafune, and others at Capcom wanted to make another game. According to the book The Untold History of Japanese Game Developers, Tokuro Fujiwara, head of Capcom's home game division at the time, was against it, but the team convinced the bosses to let them make a sequel as long as they kept up on their other projects. The resulting game was, of course, 1989's Mega Man 2, a game which, yes, I do plan to eventually cover here on Same Name Different Game, and a game that was a huge hit, selling over 1 million copies. At that point, there was no more doubt about making more of these, and Mega Man 3 was released the following year in 1990, marking the beginning of Mega Man as an annual franchise. And full disclosure, in the great Mega Man 2 or Mega Man 3 debate, I actually fall on the Mega Man 2 side, and I think this might be part of the reason why. Mega Man 2 was a passion project made by people who worked on the original wanting nothing more than to do better than they did with the original incarnation. So much so that they all agreed to take it on as an extra project. It's the platonic ideal of a sequel. More of everything in a slicker package. But Mega Man 3 is where that starts to fall apart just a bit. Which is not to say that Mega Man 3 is a bad game by any means. It's still one of the true classics for the NES and probably still makes my top 100 games of all time, but it's also where the series starts to be a corporate mandate. And it's probably not helped by the fact that Akira Kitamura, one of the major driving forces behind Mega Man's 1 and 2, left Capcom shortly after Mega Man 3 began development to form his own studio, Takeru. Though some of his influence is still felt in this game. In a 2011 interview for the book Rockman Maniacs, Kitamura said the following.
When I was leaving Capcom, the planner who was going to carry on the Mega Man series with Mega Man 3, Masahiko Kurakawa, came to me and asked if I had any ideas kicking around for Mega Man. I told him, don't update the basic gameplay system, change items 1 to 3 into a robot dog, and introduce a new prototype robot number 000.
So even on the way out, Kitamura was responsible for Rush and Proto Man, two mainstays going forward in the series. And let's finally get to it. Let's dig into this game, our first game for this episode, Mega Man 3 on the NES. Even though I said I prefer Mega Man 2, Mega Man 3 is easily the second best game in the original series, and definitely in the top 5 Mega Man games overall, if you ask me. This game represents a time when Capcom was truly firing on all cylinders with the NES. Released on September 28, 1990 in Japan, and a few months later in North America, the Super NES had yet to appear. Capcom wasn't developing for the Genesis at all yet. Their top teams were either making 8-bit games or arcade games, and it shows. This time out, shockingly, Dr. Wiley is the bad guy, and he's made 8 new robots to try and take over the world. Top Man, Shadow Man, Spark Man, Magnet Man, Hard Man, Needle Man, Snake Man, and Gemini Man face Mega Man this time around, but now he has 2 new tools he didn't have before. First, he can slide, which is perhaps the last great gameplay addition to the original series, changing level designs and boss fight strategies. Second, as previously mentioned, the Blue Bomber also has a dog now. Yes, Mega Man 3 was the debut of Rush the Robo-Dog, who is available to our boy robot from the beginning, at least in one form, the Rush Coil, allowing our hero to jump to extraordinary heights. Of course, as with the prior entry, new non-weapon items will be awarded to Mega Man after defeating certain robot masters, in addition to the weapons they drop. But this time, they're add-ons for Rush. The Rush Jet and Rush Marine, a hoverboard and submarine respectively. The weapons here are pretty good too. Eventually, the weapons in Mega Man games tend to be less than useful in normal gameplay, only finding a function against bosses. But as this was the last main series game to lack the Mega Buster charge shot, weapons like Spark Shot and especially Shadow Blade are pretty useful as you make your way through Wily's hordes. I said earlier that I like 2 more than 3 because 3 represents the annual franchisification of the Mega Man series, and that's admittedly kind of a nonsense, nebulous reason, but I actually do have a very good concrete reason for liking 2 more than 3. In 3, the boss weaknesses are a cul-de-sac. No, seriously, hear me out on this. I know it sounds silly, but most Mega Man games, even ones that are worse than 3, have consistent through lines of boss weaknesses. Like the game's original inspiration, rock, paper, scissors. You have to pick somewhere to start, of course, but once you have one weapon, you can kind of figure out a way to chain them all together and make the dominoes fall to the end. But not Mega Man 3. No, Mega Man 3 had to be different. There are 2 separate, self-contained chains of weaknesses. I have no idea how this happened, and I couldn't find any interviews about it or anything like that, but after defeating 5 bosses, you go into this weird cul-de-sac, where you have to basically start over again by beating a boss with your Buster. Shadow Man is weak to Top Spin. Spark Man is weak to Shadow Blade. Magnet Man is weak to Spark Shot. Hard Man is weak to Magnet Missile, and Top Man is weak to Hard Knuckle. But then what? You can't fight Shadow Man again, so you have to choose Snake Man, Needle Man, Gemini Man, but guess what? None of them are weak to any of the 5 weapons you have. Sure, some do a little more damage than your Buster, but definitely not a lot more. Snake Man is weak to Needle Cannon, Gemini Man is weak to Search Snake, and Needle Man is weak to Gemini Laser. And here we are again in our little cul-de-sac, with none of the other 5 bosses being weak to any of these 3 weapons. And while it's not game-breaking, I mean, both Top Man and Needle Man are pretty easy to beat with the Buster, it still feels kinda sloppy, honestly. Once you beat the first 8 stages, you get a surprise. Rather than going to Wily's castle like the previous 2 games, you're facing down remixed versions of 4 of the Master Robot stages to take on the bosses from Mega Man 2? Well, one boss, the Doc Robot, who uses all of their abilities one at a time, but yeah, crazy, right? And honestly, this used to be another thing that I held against this game, but the last couple times I've played it, I've really come around. I kind of feel like it's a missed opportunity to not have these remixed, harder stages in later games. The later games usually have 2 castles, and I honestly think this is a better and more interesting way of doing it. Once you put the Doc robot in his place 8 times, you take on Breakman, the mysterious robot with a scarf who has been randomly appearing throughout the game. Upon defeating him this final time, it is revealed that he is, in fact, Proto-Man, Megaman's brother? Do robots have siblings? I mean, I guess Roll is his sister, so... whatever. After that, it's on to Wiley's castle. As ever, a set of stages meant to test all of your skills, refight the 8 bosses, and in this case, see some throwbacks to the first Mega Man game, like a newer, easier Yellow Devil, and another clone of Mega Man. Wiley himself might be at his weakest in this game, using a weapon co-developed with Dr. Light, because this was the first time they did the "Dr. Wiley is reformed now" bit. But that's okay. It's about the journey, not the destination, and it continues what would go on to be a tradition started with Mega Man 2, where Wiley's final form is weak to what's probably the worst weapon in the game. In this case, the topspin. All these years later, Mega Man 3 is still a stone-cold classic. One of the all-time greats on Nintendo's 8-bit juggernaut, and a game no side-scrolling aficionado should miss. Moving on, Capcom also supported the NES's little brother, the Game Boy, quite heartily, and much like the NES, they released some of the best games on the platform. Gargoyle's Quest, Bionic Commando, and 5 installments of the Mega Man Classic series. And we're right here in the middle with Mega Man 3. Mega Man 3 with a Roman numeral was developed by one of Capcom's closest partners, Minakuchi Engineering, located like Capcom themselves in the Kansai region of Japan. They're probably best known for their work with the Blue Bomber, having developed 4 of the 5 Game Boy Mega Man games, with the exception of 2, but they also developed the excellent Game Boy port of Bionic Commando and the Wily Wars collection for Sega Genesis, which we will be getting to shortly. They eventually got their hands on an original console installment with Mega Man X3. Overall, it is fair to class their work as hit or miss, and this one, well, I wouldn't call it a miss, but it's not their best work on the series. That would be the wholly original Mega Man 5, but it's definitely not bad. By this point, the Game Boy games had pretty well established a formula. 4 bosses from one game, and 4 from the game that followed it. So here we have Snake Man, Spark Man, Shadow Man, and Gemini Man from Mega Man 3, and Dust Man, Drill Man, Dive Man, and Skull Man from Mega Man 4. Also added from Mega Man 4, Eddie! What's up, Eddie? Also the Charge Shot, which is an addition that I never liked in the main series. I think it fits fine with the Mega Man X games, but I feel like it kills the pace of original series games. Still, whether I like it or not, it's here, and so is Rush, of course. Though you no longer start with the Rush Coil, and the Rush Marine is completely gone. The Rush Jet now also only goes directly forward when used, more in line with the Mega Man 4 version than the Mega Man 3 version that let you fly wherever on the screen you like. Upon starting the game, you're given the choice of the 4 Mega Man 3 bosses, and you'll quickly find out that they fixed the weakness cul-de-sac. Kinda. Now, Snake Man is weak to Spark Shot, but the problem is that after clearing these 4, you do a very short Wily stage in the middle, and then you're given the option to take on the 4 Mega Man 4 bosses. And none of them are weak to any of the first 4 Robot Master weapons. But that's not the biggest problem here, no. The biggest problem here is the noticeable spike in difficulty. While the first 4 stages are relatively close to their NES counterparts, with the exception of Gemini Man, because, as I said earlier, there's no Rush Marine, these later 4 stages feel like, well, Doc Robot versions of the Mega Man 4 stages. And that's really the best way I can put it. Like, Minakuchi wanted to ratchet these up since they come later in the game. They have a lot of the elements of the NES stages they're meant to imitate, but still remain very different. For example, Dive Man stage in the console game has a section with rising and falling water, but this portable version adds a ton of instant death floating spikes. And really, that's my big problem with the difficulty here. It feels cheap because there are a ton of instant death traps and gotcha moments. There's even a room in Dustman stage where I was only able to make it through by taking an intentional hit and using rush. In fact, Dustman stage in this game is the most infuriating thing I've played through in a while, and I was starting to think it was just me, but looking around, a lot of folks, including friend of the show Matt of Boyographic, also curse this stage. I'm not joking when I say that clearing this one stage took me as long as the rest of the game put together. So if you have the absolute bullheadedness to get through these 4 stages, Wiley awaits with his latest Megaman killer, Punk. For those who don't know, the Megaman killers are 3 robots created by Minakuchi Engineering for their Game Boy series. Anchor is the first, appearing in Dr. Wily's Revenge, then Punk, and finally in Mega Man 4 with a Roman numeral, Ballad. All 3 appear in the Game Boy version of Mega Man 5 with a Roman numeral, and were featured as DLC bosses in Mega Man 10. Punk is another tough fight, but only until you figure out his attack patterns, after which he's kind of a pushover. Once defeated, he gives you the Screw Crusher weapon, which is really only useful against the Wiley machine. Speaking of, following the fight with Punk is the sole Wiley Castle stage this game has to offer, which also means that even though this game is half Mega Man 4, everything about Dr. Cossack is just gone. Now Wiley's stage is tough, to be sure, but following Dustman's stage, it's not all that bad. Took a couple of continues for me to clear, but still much less time than that stupid trash robot. Man, I hate Dustman. He's just the worst, right? Like, he's the worst. Just look at him. Stupid vent on his head. Anyways, unlike the home game, this version doesn't feature refights with the 8 boss robots, so upon reaching the end of this single stage, you fight the Wiley machine, which, in this incarnation, is one of the very easiest, full stop. Even easier than the NES version of Mega Man 3. The first part of the fight, you slide under when it jumps and shoot the eyes with the Mega Buster. And the second part, you throw the Screw Crusher up at Wiley himself. That's it. Mega Man 3 on the Game Boy kind of feels like the Mega Man 3 and 4 equivalent of the Japanese Super Mario Bros. 2, a for super players version. And while I can't say that makes me hate the game, I can say that I only recommend it for big Mega Man fans looking for a challenge. Which is more than I can say for our next game this episode. It's Mega Man 3 on DOS. And we'll get to it after these important messages.
I'm Dr. Wiley. My robots and I will control the world as soon as we get rid of that blue-dweeb Mega Man and his Robo-Dog Rush. Bomb Man, make sure they have a blast. What? Mega Man's taking over the bomb? Cut Man, watch out. Mega Man can use your own power against you just like that. Okay, Mega Man, can you stop Proto Man and Guts Man at the same time? I don't think so.
Mega Man, collect them all from Bandai.
今度は宇宙で決戦だ。ロックマン。ロボット犬ラッシュを従え、さらにパワーアップ。ファミコンソフトロックマン3ドクター・ワイリーの最後。近日発売予定。カプコン。
I want Earthworm Jim 2! I want Road Rash 3! I want Comic Zone! I want Primal Rage! Mom!
Hey! What you want is Sega Channel, the only gift that lets you play up to 50 video games a month as often as you want, while your parents pay less than 50 cents a day. Ask for Sega Channel, and if they say yes, you say...
Thank you, Mother!
Get hooked in. It's a gamer's dream come true. Parents, this holiday season, call your cable company to get hooked in to Sega Channel.
This game seems to now be known as Megaman 3, The Robots Are Revolting, which would be a convenient excuse for me to not cover it, but the box, manual, and title screen do not carry that subtitle. It comes from some flavor text, and seems to just be an easy way to differentiate it from the NES game. But one look at this nightmare, and you can tell the title doesn't need that much differentiation. Now, back in my Mega Man 1 video, some people accused me of making the first DOS Mega Man game look worse than it actually is, with slower than optimized gameplay and CGA graphics. Well, I made sure this ran at full speed and used VGA, and guess what? It's still torture. And I kind of feel bad for piling on because it's the work of just one guy, Steve Rosner. But by the same token, fantastic games throughout history like Cave Story or Yar's Revenge, to just name a couple, have also been the work of one person. Near as I can guess, back in the day, someone at Capcom got super drunk and handed the rights to some of their biggest franchises to the worst publisher in video game history for release on home computers. No, not LJN. LJN looks like Konami compared to High-Tech Expressions. They don't get as much attention because they released fewer games and went belly up sooner. But rest assured, High-Tech Expressions released almost no playable games. Nearly everything they touched turned to fetid, rotting garbage. This game is so bad, it kinda defies explanation. The stages are meandering, maze-like messes, some of which have almost no enemies in them. The rules are inconsistent, like sometimes fire kills you instantly, and sometimes it just does a little damage. There's no music, which feels especially outrageous for this particular series of video games, and the sound effects are just grating. I mean, it's awful in every way a game can be awful. It sits in the SNDG Hall of Shame, alongside WWF Raw on the Game Gear, Beavis and Butthead on the Game Gear, and of course, the original Mega Man on DOS. But if you want to take a test drive for yourself, you can play this game right in your browser from archive.org. And putting that dumpster fire behind us brings us back to our friends at Minakuchi Engineering, who, as I alluded to earlier, did make a Mega Man game for the Sega Genesis, but it only got a physical release in PAL territories and Japan. Here in the US, it did technically come out, but only as part of the Sega Channel service, an early experiment from Sega with getting downloadable games over your telecommunications service. The game in question was called Rockman Mega World in Japan, and Mega Man The Wiley Wars in Western territories. And it is a remake of the first 3 Mega Man games. This game has a pretty notorious history here in the US because any game that we didn't get, we tend to covet. And while, yeah, it was on the Sega Channel, so few people had that, it practically counts as unreleased until recent years, when it first appeared on one of AtGame's terrible portable Genesis clones, and more recently in a respectable form on the Genesis Mini, finally becoming properly playable for the masses in North America, and maybe losing a bit of mystique in the process. Because of this rarity prior to last year, really, this game tended to get 2 reactions. Either it was the secret best version of the first 3 Mega Man games, or it was one of the worst hatchet jobs in video game history, with little in between, but I tend to fall in between. The graphics look pretty good, the music sounds pretty good, but the games don't feel like their NES counterparts. The biggest problem is the games suffer from some pretty inexcusable slowdown. I mean, this is a platform notorious for its blast processing ad campaign and hosting a variety of shoot-'em-ups with fast-paced twitch action that the Super Nintendo could generally only dream of. This game doesn't feel very optimized. It's not the biggest deal in the world, because The slowdown is mostly localized to boss fights and the dark sections of Shadow Man's stage in the Wiley Castle, but yikes, it's still pretty shocking to see. Overall, the game is just Mega Man 3 with new graphics and an FM synth soundtrack. There are only a very few noticeable changes outside of how it looks and sounds. Of those, first and foremost, in most circumstances, you can never run out of topspin. I have no idea how this works or what's going on, but against certain bosses it does drain, but generally, your topspin just doesn't use weapon energy. Related to that, it also does way less damage to the copy robot here, which it kills in one shot in the NES game. It also feels generally easier, but that could be because I had just played the NES and Game Boy games right before this one, so I was able to pretty easily do a 1-credit clear. Still, the boss weaknesses seemed more effective, and maybe the enemy hitboxes were a little bigger. It's hard to say for sure, but I certainly had an even easier time with it than the NES original. So yeah, that's our games. The Genesis version is a fairly faithful port actually, and once you kind of see it in action, there's not a lot more to talk about, but I am really glad that it was included on the Genesis Mini, because again, it's this thing that had this mystique around it, and now people can check it out for themselves and decide for themselves what they think of it. Now, of course, Mega Man 3 has seen a few other releases in emulation form, most notably the Mega Man Anniversary Collection and the Mega Man Legacy Collection. The Anniversary Collection version actually does add a couple of things, including Navi mode, which adds a graphical overlay and some hints and remixes some of the music tracks. It's based on the Japanese PS1 version, but the emulation is not as accurate as the Legacy Collection versions, and plus, the Legacy Collection version is available on every modern system from PCs, Xbox One, 3DS, Switch, PS4. It's just out there and available, so that's probably the way that I would go. I bought it twice, once on PS4 and once on Switch, so yeah. Anyways, let's not get too bogged down in the minutia of those compilations, and do like we always do and take a look and a listen side by side. I have to say, the NES takes this one easily in the visual department. I might have to give the stereo Game Boy soundtrack the edge though. Both are good on the Genesis as well, but I just like the NES look and both the NES and Game Boy soundtracks more than the Genesis, honestly. Between these two scores, it's a close call, but I think I really like the portable arrangements. The DOS version obviously falls short in both categories. And that makes it time to give the edge. And of course, it's the NES version. What else could it be? A game does not get to be 30 years old and remain a commercial success, a critical darling, and a fan favorite for no reason. Here's the reason. It's really good. But if you have played it to death, I would actually recommend checking out the Game Boy version for a bit of a change of pace. Although, again, make sure you know what you're getting into and are prepared for that difficulty spike in the back half. The Genesis version, it's a curio. If you're interested, I say find a way to check it out. And the DOS version is junk. Do not play it. It's terrible. If you want to play some of these on original hardware, I have some good news for you. There is some level of sanity returning to the world of casual NES collecting, and you can get a bear card of Mega Man 3 for about $20. The Game Boy version is trending a little more expensive, closer to $30, but a Japanese version of either will be a little bit cheaper. The Genesis version, because there was no physical edition for North America, is a bit more expensive. It's a pretty rare cart in both PAL territories and Japan and is going to cost you a lot. Honestly, I would go the Genesis mini route or load it up on a flash cart. The DOS version, if you actually want a physical copy, is super expensive because Mega Man fans love collecting Mega Man stuff, even if it's bad. So I would really just avoid that. If you're not concerned about original hardware, Mega Man Legacy Collection is on everything, including the 3DS. And speaking of the 3DS, if you want to check out the Game Boy version, it's $3 on the 3DS eShop. And yeah, that does it for this installment of Same Name, Different Game. But I'm Joe, and I will see you next time. Hey folks, thanks so much for watching. If you dug the video, do all the stuff. Like, subscribe, ring that stupid bell, and comment below if you like Mega Man 2 or Mega Man 3 more. If you really dug it, consider supporting the shows on Patreon, because then you can request a game to be covered in an episode, just like Frank did for this one. You'll also get early access to new videos, your name here with these cool people, and more. If you want more Mega Man, my video on Mega Man 1 is on the left, and the one on Mega Man 5 is on the right.